This military action, taken in accord with United Nations resolutions and with the consent of the United States Congress, follows months of constant and virtually endless diplomatic activity on the part of the United Nations, the United States, and many, many other countries.
President who focused much of his attention on foreign affairs. Now, would that we could all celebrate a 90th birthday like George Herbert Walker Bush. The 41st President of the United States will celebrate in Maine tonight with a dinner for 200 family members and friends. Irish tenor Ronan Tynan will perform. Earlier today, he skydived. And he's going to be able to smile a year and a half after he was very ill. A lot of questions about his immediate future, but he is still with us, thankfully. He enjoys a mostly favorable legacy with the American people. His 66% approval rating is second only to President Bill Clinton. But what is his real legacy when we look to policies, decisions, successes, and failures, and how all of this resonates today? Tom Whalen's a professor of social sciences at Boston University, my second home. He writes about our presidents. Consider the release of his latest book, JFK and His Enemies, that hit shelves this month. Pleasure to welcome him to Midpoint. Tom, thanks for joining us.
My pleasure.
Tom, let's start right there, I guess, because this was a president who had to focus a lot of his attention on foreign affairs. If you take what George Herbert Walker Bush did and you bring that forward into 2014, how successful or how unsuccessful was he to make a lasting impact?
Well, he was kind of the indispensable man because the Cold War, as it was ending during his term, could have gone in a number of negative ways. And he said at the time that it would do the United States no good when the Berlin Wall came down to go thump his chest and dance on the wall and kind of really rub it in the Russians' noses. So he did it in a very kind of deliberate, careful way, winding down the Cold War with his partner, Mikhail Gorbachev, in the old Soviet Union without any real bloodshed. And it's really a tremendous testament to his diplomatic skills as president.
Is it fair to say that, I mean, he certainly was involved in a very interesting period of geopolitical transition here. Where does that all rank as far as what other presidents in our modern era had to do with this whole world view, take it, shape it, and still make it work for America?
Well, I think he'll be remembered for ending the Cold War, but also trying to struggle for a kind of a post-Cold War vision. And I think although he very skillfully ended the Cold War, he really didn't come up with what kind of world the United States should be as in terms of leadership and power. And I think we're still struggling well into the 21st century with trying to decide what our role is going to be.
Was that a failing of his or a failing of those who followed after him?
I think it's a combination of both, but certainly he did not have the answer, and I don't think his successor, Bill Clinton, had an answer. His son thought he had an answer, and that involved a lot more intervention on the global scene. And as we've seen, that did not quite work out the way he hoped for.
You put father and son together, and every time you hear father and son talked about, the word always comes up, Iraq. It is always simple there. It is going to live with them for the rest of their lives here. Is it unfair to put George Herbert Walker Bush in the same sentence as his son when it comes to Iraq because of different times in history, different challenges that they faced?
I do think it's unfair because George Herbert Walker Bush had a sense of history. He remembered, for example, the Korean War and the fact when the United States UN force went above into North Korea, and that led to China's intervention. George Herbert Walker Bush did not want to put American boots on the ground in Iraq because he knew that basically Iraq wasn't really a country. It was a bunch of religious factions going at it in a civil war. And he thought it would be disastrous, it would be a long quagmire that the United States would spend a long time trying to extricate itself from. And as it turns out, history has proven George Herbert Walker to be right. His son just did not have that same grasp of history or geopolitical strategy. And it's cost America.
That's a wonderful point to make, the quagmire that it would be and that it could be. He was right there. He knew it. So people will always ask then, Tom, why couldn't the people who followed after him be smart enough to follow what he left behind? I mean, it seemed as if he had a pretty good handle on it. Was it just hubris on their part or just not wanting to be a part of what Herbert Walker Bush did and set their own tone?
In many ways, it was kind of a youthful rebellion in terms of, he wanted to differentiate himself from his father, have his own legacy. And Dick Cheney, who was very much the ultimate hawk, had his ear. But someone like, say, a Brent Scowcroft, who was very close to the first President Bush, he was advising against such, precipitous action. And it really, I think George W. Bush was ill-served by Dick Cheney and the neo-hawk crowd.
That's an interesting point. We could dig into that. We could do a whole couple of hours on that one as well. You said earlier that he ended the Cold War, certainly that he was there. Fair to say, though, he was a force behind it, but he just hit it at just the right time, just like anything else in history does. He had the right players around him to make it happen.
And I think that's fair to say, but he had the necessary skill set to wind it down. Initially, he was very skeptical, very suspicious of Mikhail Gorbachev. He thought that Gorbachev had charmed President Reagan to the point where he wasn't really seeing reality. But when he met Gorbachev himself in person, he realized that this was a man of substance, someone to be taken seriously, and someone, more importantly, you can do business with.
Two negative things that come up about George Herbert Walker Bush. There are many people who perceive that he simply did not care enough about domestic issues. Was that a fair perception?
I think that's somewhat unfair. You have to remember that, the economy was tanking at a time right after the Reagan Revolution, when the budget deficits from the Reagan era were really exploding. And George, H.W. Bush, he was kind of like the guy after a parade went through town. He's the sanitation worker, has to clean everything up, pick up all the garbage and whatnot. And he kind of cleaned up the mess economically with the Budget Act of 1990. But to do so, he had to break his word on taxes. He raised taxes and came to a compromise with the Democrats in return for budget cuts. And what it turned out was a balance, what led eventually to a balanced budget under his successor, Bill Clinton. Bill Clinton carried on that fiscal prudence into his term, and what it resulted was the prosperity of the 1990s.
30 seconds. Is it fair to say that he ran an inept campaign in 1992, as some have characterized, and probably, if he did better, should have had a second term?
He ran an inept campaign, but he was also a victim of bad economic times. It really was about the economy.
That will answer everything right there, because is it not always about the economy? Succinct and right to the point. Hey, Tom, thanks so much. It's nice to be able to revisit, and I don't think people give enough credit to George Herbert Walker Bush sometimes, but it's nice to see that there are people out there who still give him the credit he deserves. Thank you so much for your time, Tom.
You're welcome.
Pleasure. Take care. If we still have it up, I want to see if we have the tweet that was sent out earlier today, and I know that the folks in the control room are going crazy right now because I was supposed to call for it earlier. Here we go. I mentioned that in Maine today, the president decided to take another skydive. Here's his tweet. It's a wonderful day in Maine. In fact, nice enough for a parachute jump. And I believe that this is the one from earlier today. Yes, this is from the Fox affiliate in Boston. We're happy to say that the president had his jump. He's fine. Everything's good. When I'm 90 years old, I want to do exactly that. I want to have that kind of ability to do that. Congratulations, Mr. President, and a very happy 90th birthday. We have a lot more to come. Stick with us here on Midpoint, where every day we question everything.